The family unit is a solid obstacle. It creates private territory. It creates unmonitored inheritance. It creates strategic depth. To achieve total velocity of extraction, the grid must perform a terminal social liquidation. The individual must be rendered liquid, solitary, vulnerable, and perfectly synchronized with the server. Part 1. The visceral layer, the thermodynamic breakdown of the couple. In the visceral history of the architect, the pair bond was a metabolic heat engine. It was the most efficient way to manage ATP exhaustion. Analogy: the double redoubt versus the single radiator. The primal primate did not sleep alone. To sleep alone was to invite predation. The pair bond allowed for the metabolic buffer. One watches while the other recovers. One hunts while the other maintains the redoubt. This shared expenditure of ATP created a state of crystallization, a physical unit that was stronger than the sum of its parts. You shared the freezing rain, you gripped the steel together, and you protected the genetic war chest. In the year 2026, the machine has identified this metabolic buffer as an efficiency leak. When two people pool their resources, they require 30% less systemic interaction. They buy one house instead of two. They share one heater. They support each other's health, reducing the yield for the medical-industrial complex. The siphon of solitude. The market of one requires that every unit be a solitary radiator. When you are alone, your ATP is siphoned at 2 times velocity. You are forced to pay the family unit is a solid obstacle. It creates private territory. It creates unmonitored inheritance. It creates strategic depth. To achieve total velocity of extraction, the grid must perform a terminal social liquidation. The individual must be rendered liquid, solitary, vulnerable, and perfectly synchronized with the server. Part 1. The visceral layer, the thermodynamic breakdown of the couple. In the visceral history of the architect, the pair bond was a metabolic heat engine. It was the most efficient way to manage ATP exhaustion. Analogy: the double redoubt versus the single radiator. The primal primate did not sleep alone. To sleep alone was to invite predation. The pair bond allowed for the metabolic buffer. One watches while the other recovers. One hunts while the other maintains the redoubt. This shared expenditure of ATP created a state of crystallization, a physical unit that was stronger than the sum of its parts. You shared the freezing rain, you gripped the steel together, and you protected the genetic war chest. In the year 2026, the machine has identified this metabolic buffer as an efficiency leak. When two people pool their resources, they require 30% less systemic interaction. They buy one house instead of two. They share one heater. They support each other's health, reducing the yield for the medical-industrial complex. The siphon of solitude. The market of one requires that every unit be a solitary radiator. When you are alone, your ATP is siphoned at 2 times velocity. You are forced to pay the loneliness tax on everything: housing, energy, food, and emotional stability. This is the visceral breach, the softening of the solitary shell. Without a partner to provide the high-friction feedback of a real relationship, the body undergoes isolation decay. There is no one to watch your back, so your nervous system stays in a state of permanent low-voltage redline. This chronic cortisol flood melts your bone density and induces systemic drift toward terminal softness. The extraction of the hearth. The family hearth was a point of zero entropy. The grid has replaced it with the digital glow. You are siphoning your metabolic energy into a screen, seeking a proxy for the warmth that the grid has surgically removed from your life. The visceral truth. A solitary unit is a weak unit. The grid destroys marriage to ensure that you are always in a state of near bankruptcy, both financially and biologically. You are a liquid asset with no defensive depth. Part 2. The neural layer, the synaptic divorce and the rot of oxytocin. The second layer of the hunt is the war for the neural signal. The grid has performed a surgical synaptic divorce, replacing the high-friction bond of marriage with the high-frequency engagement of the platform. Basal ganglia. Hijacking. The grid has discovered that the basal ganglia cannot distinguish between the solid oxytocin of a physical partner and the synthetic dopamine of a digital interaction. By flooding your neural pathways with validation cues, likes, swipes, notifications, the grid induces a state of neural rot. You are being rewired to find real human presence boring or high friction. The liquidation of trust. Marriage requires the crystallization of trust, a slow, high-integrity neural process. The grid operates on liquid flux. It encourages the update over the repair. You are trained to view partners as disposable software rather than solid hardware. This is the status trap of the modern ego. You believe you are free to choose, but you have lost the neural capacity to commit. Neural extraction of the tribe. The grid has dismantled the neural sync that occurs between a long-term couple. This sync provided a cognitive redoubt, a private language that the grid could not decode. By atomizing the population, the grid ensures that the only sync you have is with the algorithm. Your thoughts are no longer private. They are data points for the next cycle of extraction. Analyze the cognitive liquidity. The solitary unit is more reactive. It is more susceptible to corrective ideologies. It has no social insulation. Without the high-friction debate of a marriage, the individual brain becomes a soft node, easily programmed by the grid's high-frequency noise. This is terminal neural rot. The institution of marriage is being deleted because it is a dark sector for the grid. A couple can survive a crisis through shared ATP. A solitary unit must beg the grid for survival. The loneliness protocol is the final enclosure of the human heart. Максим. Вторая фаза диссекции протокола одиночества. Мы переходим к уровню ДНК и городской инфраструктуры. Система не просто советует быть одному. Она перепрошивает твои гены и строит бетонные соты, где для двоих физически нет места. Вскрываем часть 3 – эволюционный слой и часть 4 – системный слой. Part 3 – The evolutionary dissection, the epigenetic erase of the inheritor. The lineage is a threat to the grid's eternity. In the visceral history of the architect, the pair bond was the primary vehicle for crystallization. To marry was to declare a 100-year war against entropy. You weren't just living, you were deploying a strategic war chest into the next century. Analogy: the ancestral oak versus the seasonal weed. The primal primate evolved to protect the genetic surplus. A family was a solid bank of information and resources. You forged the steel of your name. You endured the rain to secure the territory for those who carry your blood. Evolution favored the solid node because it could resist systemic shocks. In the year 2026, the systemic drift has engineered an evolutionary cul-de-sac. The grid has identified blood loyalty as a massive source of systemic friction. A man who fights for his children cannot be fully broken by the market. To optimize the extraction, the grid must perform an epigenetic liquidation, the termination of the inheritor. The body responds to the environment. When the grid provides high-fidelity synthetic proxies for intimacy, the body silences the genes for expansion and protection. This is the visceral breach. Without the high-friction demand of a household to defend, the alpha drive undergoes terminal ATP exhaustion. The predator is regressed into a consumer node. Hormonal sabotage. Isolation is a biological signal of failure. In the protocol of loneliness, the primate's hormonal profile is reformatted for stasis. Testosterone drops, estrogen dysregulates, cortisol redlines. You are no longer building a lineage. You are maintaining a liquid state of biological compliance, the death of the 100-year plan. Evolution requires the architect's seat, the prefrontal cortex, to plan for generations. The grid hijacks the basal ganglia to focus on the 24-hour dopamine cycle. Why build a legacy of steel when you can rent a feeling of status? This is neural rot at the level of the species. The result is epigenetic sterilization. By 2030, the primate will not want to marry because it will have lost the biological capacity to perceive the future. You are a genetic dead end, a biological artifact siphoning its remaining energy into a solitary void. The architect watches the fire of the lineage die. The serf watches the blue light of the terminal. Part 4. The systemic dissection. The architecture of the pod and the solo yield. The fourth layer is the total enclosure of the social substrate. The machine understands a fundamental truth. A single person is a 100% efficient asset for extraction. A family is a dark sector, a place where energy is shared, not sold. To achieve total velocity, the grid has built the solo ghetto. Dissect the architecture of the pod. Look at the modern city, the terminal coordinate of the systemic drift, the one-by-one enclosure. The new urban redoubt is not designed for the tribe. It is designed for the liquid surf. Small, high-efficiency pods where the presence of another human creates mechanical friction. The grid has made solid commitment a physical impossibility. You are living in a biological battery case, optimized for the extraction of your attention. The loneliness tax. Systemic analysis reveals that a solitary unit has zero defensive depth. You pay more for energy, more for food, more for access. This is the status trap of the independent professional. You believe you are free, but you are actually just 100% exposed to the market's predation. You have no solid social anchor to resist the ATP exhaustion of the gig economy, the liquidation of the collective. Marriage was the last guild, the last union, the last private corporation. By destroying it, the grid has ensured that you are always a market of one. You have no war chest of shared labor. You have no one to grip the steel with you when the rain turns into a flood. The architecture of control is now a behavioral ledger. The grid monitors your social atomization to ensure you stay in a state of controlled insecurity. A lonely node is a compliant node. It seeks validation from the grid because it has no solid validation from the pack. You are working 80 hours a week to pay for the access to a digital tribe that is biologically liquidating you. The systemic drift toward 2036 is the transition to absolute individual feudalism. The solids will hold the keys to the real collectives and the private lineages. The liquids will be nothing but streams of solitary data begging for a match to survive the cold. The architect builds the walls of the hive. The user is the ghost in the cell. The bond is dead. The ledger is full. The grid has won. The couple is dead. The family is a ghost. You are a single unit in a concrete box. This is the end of the us. The visceral breach. Body without touch. Your body is a battery, nothing more. 10 years without the physical warmth of another node has caused total systemic drift. The cold skin. No touch means your nervous system is